So today is the last Dharma talk of our 2015 year. Maybe Master will give one on New Year's Eve. To conclude this year, I wanted to give a little bit of a special Dharma talk on the new chanting book that we're going to be using for the winter retreat. It starts on Tuesday. The monastics traditionally have what's called a rains retreat for 3 months. So for 9 months of the year, the monastics are very involved in being active and being of benefit to the outside world. For 3 months, traditionally, they use that time to center themselves and to make progress in their own practice so that when the retreat ends, they can be of even greater benefit. So we want to support the monastics in their time here at MABA and all around the world where people are going into retreat. Now this happens at different times of the year depending on the causes and conditions. Of course, in Asia they have a monsoon season, so that the retreat was usually called a rains retreat. But here we don't have monsoons, we have winter. And I understand that tonight and tomorrow we're going to be accompanied by a little winter storm. So it's just right on time. But today, very beautiful, 60 degrees or more. So to talk about the new chanting book, nearly 14 years ago or so, before really knowing Master Jiru, I attended a meditation center at the Thai temple where the Master was leading a group of about a dozen or so people in meditation. And after the session, he asked each person to describe the state of mind that they were in during the practice. And I don't recall really what people said specifically, but I remember when it was my turn, I said just one word: garbage. So during the session, my mind had a bunch of thoughts and feelings, but I realized that they were not really very important. It was like the usual garbage that one would throw out. And I've noticed throughout the years that some people, mostly Westerners, are not so comfortable at first with chanting, and some will even leave right before the chanting, and it's not to go downstairs and cook, but to avoid the chanting. And I sort of understand this because we may have been forced as young people to participate in a church or some other services and now we feel like chanting is kind of like that and not very meaningful. We're just saying a bunch of words. But for me, the chanting is very different than my experience as a child when we recited Jewish prayers in the synagogue. Chanting for me now is like putting into my mind something much more important, very valuable. By chanting, I begin to understand the teachings and I test them out in my practice. So each time I recite the verses, I try to see if I can pull out just one or more, and I put them into practice the rest of the day. So chanting is part of the practice of remembering what is important. It's the opposite of all of the garbage. So during our winter retreat, we had the last few years had a little different chanting book to kind of wake us up and to look at things new and afresh. A few years ago, we chanted the entire Diamond Sutra in 12 parts, and then at the last day of the winter retreat, we chanted the entire Diamond Sutra. Last year, we chanted Sung Sung's Trust in Mind. The third is Chan master after Bodhidharma. And this winter, as a follow-up to our last two retreats that we've had here at MABA on Hui Nang's Platform Sutra, and in concert with our winter study group that we will have in Chesterfield, where we'll be continuing our study of this Platform Sutra, we're going to be chanting a section from the Platform Sutra as well as a sutta from the original Buddhist discourses. And the section that we're going to chant from the Platform Sutra is called the Song of Formlessness. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our chanting book, and if you'd like to follow along, you have the chanting book in front of you, and you can see that the opening verses begin with this very famous verse, Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa, and then homage to the Blessed One. And just for those people who have an interest in knowing where these come from, this is the traditional Pali verse which begins the chanting wherever you go, usually. Wherever they chant in Pali, they begin this. And in many of the Buddhist traditions, they begin with this verse. And this verse actually is found as the first line in the text called the Majjhima Nikaya, the middle-length discourses. So at the very beginning of that text, this verse, Namo Tassa Bhagavato, is found. And it's also found in the Samyutta Nikaya Part 3 and in numerous sections of the Vinaya. So this is a very well-known verse. And the verse that begins, homage to the Blessed One, the worthy, undefiled one, the perfectly self-awakened one, this is actually from MN 27, from the sutta that's called the Shorter Elephant Footprint Simile, which is a story about a fellow who was been asked what it was like to be around the Buddha and to hear him talk, and he said that you could tell that the Buddha was a great teacher because his footprint was quite large. It was a teaching footprint. In the second section, we typically chant a part of a sutra from the Mahayana tradition, sutra, the Sanskrit word, so we relate to the Mahayana tradition. And for example, during this year, we're going to alternate, during the year we alternate between the Heart Sutra and the Diamond Sutra. 1 month we do the Heart Sutra section, and another month a section from the Diamond Sutra. And we chant this first in English, and then we chant it again in Chinese at the very end. So this year we're going to be chanting from the Platform Sutra by Hui Nang. And he lived from 638 to 713, and his name actually means wisdom, ability. Hui is the character depicting a person sweeping with a broom. It's the meaning that we sweep away all of our afflictions and things that separate us from being wise. We get rid of that and we have our wisdom. And Nung is a character actually that depicts a great brown bear who's very brave and capable. So this is the ability part of the meaning of his word name. So together this means the great ability to sweep away ignorance, allowing wisdom to emerge. So Hui Nang was the 6th great Chan master after Bodhidharma, who had brought Buddhism to Southeast China. And it was through Hui Nang that Chan started proliferating throughout China, eventually to Japan, known as Zen, and then here to the West. And his major treatise was the Platform Sutra, and it begins with Hui Nang telling the story of his own enlightenment in 11 parts. And then it's followed by a teaching in 46 parts, so that there's a total of 57 parts. Each part is rather short, like a paragraph or two. A few parts are a little bit longer. And Red Pine's English translation is just under 50 pages. And the Chinese version from the Tunwan Caves is just under 25 pages, about half as long. The cave is one of the, they have different versions that came from different caves. So this form of songless, a song of formlessness, is from section 36 of the 57 parts. And it's actually a poem in 7 verses. And there are 8 lines to each verse, and there are 5 Chinese characters in each line. And we recite the English. We're only going to be chanting the last 5 verses because of time. And when we chant the Chinese, because the Chinese is more compact, we can do the entire 7 versions. So I'm actually going to come back and talk about one of the verses in a little bit, but first I want to say a few words about some of the other things that we're going to be chanting today. So after we chant the Platform Sutra Song of Formlessness in the last 5 verses, we are going to be chanting a sutta that is related to formlessness, called, and I have trouble pronouncing this, I'm going to do my best, Nisaraniya Sutta, which means leading to escape. And it's from the Anguttara Nikaya, or the further factor of these discourses, the numbered discourses of the Buddha, where they have a section where he talks about the number 1, all of the things related to number 1 and number 2 and number 3, all the way up to number 9. So we have, this is from the Nisaraniya is a word that means escape. Nisarana, to escape. What is it that we're escaping from? So in the actual text itself, it leaves off what we're escaping from. And so when people come and chant here and they're not too familiar with this, we added the term from suffering. That's what it is that we really want to escape from. So in Chinese, the Nisaraniya in Chinese is Chuli, which means to renounce or to escape, leading to liberation. And this term escape actually comes from a teaching that the Buddha gives on gratification, danger, and escape. So the Buddha knew that sense-based pleasures, sensual pleasures, all have an immediate condition of being gratifying. Otherwise, we wouldn't be attracted to it. The Buddha knew that we would have this immediate gratification, and that's what would cause our grasping. But many people would not see that within this gratification there might be a danger. So we need to know how to escape from both the gratification and the danger in order to escape from suffering. This is the Nisarana. So this gratification, danger, and escape is discussed in a number of suttas. One of my favorites is called the Dart of Painful Feelings. For those people who are interested in looking into this further, it's a very small teaching that the Buddha gives about how it is that when we experience a painful feeling, and our mind is not trained, we experience it both bodily and then we repeatedly experience it over and over again mentally. But when a person is a noble disciple and their mind is trained, when they experience a painful feeling, they only feel it immediately in the body, and then they don't replay it again and again in their mind, so they don't have that kind of suffering. So the Nisaraniya Sutta actually has 2 suttas named that same name. One is from AN 5200, and that's the one that we're going to be chanting. And the other one is from AN 613, and it is basically the same kind of name of the sutta, but it has 6 properties related to it. So the one that we won't be chanting, the 6 parts, relate to, the first 4 parts relate to the Brahma Vihara. It relates to the cultivation of loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity as means of escape. And then add 2 more parts, one which is called signlessness, which is very close to understanding formlessness, but we won't get into that so much today. And then the 6th part, which is letting go of self-identity. So these are the 6 parts that are discussed in the other Nisanara Niya Sutta. By the end of the winter retreat, I'll know how to pronounce this. The one that we are going to chant, the Nisaraniya Sutta with 5 properties, has sense-based pleasures first, kama, not karma, but K-A-M-A, which is a sensual desire, like in the words Kama Sutra that you might be familiar with. And then attending to ill will, being aware of when the mind goes into ill will, which is vyapada, which is the same term that's used to discuss the negative hindrance that comes into the mind, the second of the 5 hindrances. And then what's called attending to harmfulness, when the mind enters into a state where it has annoying, vexation, injury, the desire to really want to hurt someone. And then attending to forms. So this is a little bit tricky because when we try to understand the 3 realms of the mind, the desire realm, the form realm, and the formless realm, we begin to understand the technical side of this when we actually are in our deep practice. We see how the mind wants to gravitate towards desiring things. I want this, I want that, I want things to work out this way, I don't want things to work out that way. I want to let my mind wander. This is all part of the desire realm. And once the mind becomes more refined and recognizes the desire realm for what it is, then the mind it enters into what's called a form realm. And in the form realm, the mind just sees things as they are. No longer has an attachment or desire for those things. Recognize that the external world, in fact, does not inherently exist. And as the forms dissolve in this way, then the mind recognizes forms as having a side which would be called formless. And the consciousness of the mind that we've been talking about in the previous Dharma talks that I've given about consciousness, the mind enters into these states of absorption where we'll call the last 4 of the 8 emancipations, where the mind no longer attaches to forms at all. And the first of those stages is what's called infinite space, where the mind begins to understand and experience directly the spaciousness, the space between the thoughts, the space between the feelings, the space between our identity and our experience, which leads the mind into the formless state, where the self-identity. So on one side we see that forms do not inherently exist. In the 5th part we recognize that we ourselves don't exist the way that we think that we do. That we really don't own things. These things are not mine. This is not me, this is not who I am. These higher states of awareness about letting go of identity and how the mind wants to attach to all of of the aggregates. It wants to attach to this body, this is who I am, my feelings, that's who I am, my thoughts and perceptions, that's who I am, my habit energy, that's who I am, my consciousness, that's who I am. And we begin to see that all of that is an illusion, and we can let go of our self-identity in that way. So in the sutta that we'll read, it says, furthermore, there is the case where the mind of a monk, when attending to forms, doesn't leap up at forms, doesn't grow confident, steadfast, or released in forms. But when attending to formlessness, his mind leaps up, and formlessness grows confident, steadfast, and released in formlessness. When his mind is rightly gone, rightly developed, and has rightly risen above, gained release, and become disjoined from forms, then whatever fermentations, it's the mental formations, habit energy, torments and fevers that there are that arise in dependence on forms, he's released from them. He does not experience that feeling. This is expounded as the escape from forms. But we should recognize that this is not the ultimate nirvana. This was mistaken as a nirvana by the Buddhas, two of the Buddhist teachers who had attained highest levels of consciousness, of formlessness, but had not attained the ultimate nirvana. So that's why the sutta goes on and explains letting go of the self-identity as well. After we read that, we're going to do what's called the 4 great vows. And this actually, sometimes people have an interest in where this arises from. And we don't have a real historical moment where we say the 4 great vows, this is where they were established. But we do know that the Chinese master, Zhi, who was the founder of the Tendai school of China, sometime during the 6th century, he used this as a form of bodhisattva practice and passed this on to his disciples. And this is something that refers to, in the original Buddhist practice, a vow that was made by the Buddha that eventually would become Gautama. This Buddha's name was, before he became a Buddha, his name was Sumedha, and he made the vow to enter into the Buddhist Sangha, but he didn't want to become enlightened. He wanted to return and be of benefit to all beings. So in the Platform Sutra, Huineng also gives us a short teaching about these 4 vows. And he says, good friends, as for I vow to save all beings, no matter how numerous, this is the first of the 4 vows, it isn't Huineng who does this saving. Good friends, every being you can think of saves themselves with their own nature in their own bodies. What does it mean they save themselves with their own nature? The wrong views and afflictions, the ignorance and the delusion of their own material bodies already possess the nature of original enlightenment. It is just this nature of original enlightenment that saves them with their right views. So there's more that can be said about these things, but for the purpose of time, just going to say a few things. Then the next section that we recite are called the 3 refuges. And in the Dhammapada, the Buddha kind of gives the formula for the Dhamma, for taking refuge, and we know that this is a very early practice that people did when they asked the Buddha to join the monastic tradition, that there would be a traditional ceremony where people would do this. And so for those people who would like, they can recite the 3 vows of taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha. The Buddha, we take refuge in the Buddha as a teacher, but we also recognize our own Buddha nature, that we're learning how to practice and to have our own Buddha nature come out. And the Dhamma, the teachings themselves, and the Sangha, the community of those who practice well, particularly the monastics. So we take this and we bow after each of the 3 jewels that we recite. And this formula that we have here today, if you go on the internet and you look for it, you'll find that all of the pages on the internet cite the Lotus Sutra as the source of this verse. But this is actually incorrect. All the pages on the internet are wrong. So maybe one person put it up and then everybody else followed along. So it's possible. So actually this comes from the Flower Ornament Sutra, Book 11, where it is precisely said just as it is in our text, and it's in the Chinese, and it's translated very well here. So we just need to recognize. Actually, I went on the Wikipedia page and I signed up and I tried to make the correction, but for some reason or other, I didn't quite know how to save the page that I corrected, so it's still up there. Maybe it was meant to be that it would be that way. So finally, we do a sharing of merit. And the sharing of the merit that we do is a traditional one. It's actually, I don't have the original source for that, but it was, it's cited at the very end of the Diamond Sutra commentary by Thich Nhat Hanh. And for those people who may not be aware, Thich Nhat Hanh had a cerebral hemorrhage, a stroke, about maybe a month ago. And he's recovering in a hospital in France. We're not sure actually how he will be. We do know that he's opened his eyes a few times and has held the hand of his some of his attendants, so we're not sure the outcome at this time. So it's good to share the merit. This way, everything that we do, we can avoid the attachment of pride. We can avoid the attachment of thinking that it's actually us that's attained all of this stuff. We can kind of let go of that. Which brings me back to the formlessness verse that we're going to be reciting in English and in Chinese. And in the booklet that you have, it's the 3rd of the verses. And it goes, and I have a little sheet that I gave you, and the Red Pine translation is quite good. It says, people who truly follow the way don't consider the faults of the world. Those who consider the wrongs of the world only add to their own. I don't condemn the faults of others. My own wrongs are what I'm after. Just get rid of thoughts and wrongs, and all your afflictions will shatter. So when I started reading this and studying this, being a therapist and interested in psychology, there's something very profound and deep in this to help people when they tend to suffer a lot. And they're very critical of themselves and of others. And one of the difficulties with this translation is that it emphasizes not getting into the faults of the world, but then it has this idea that we should examine and criticize our own thoughts, which is not really what the meaning is. And in order to really see that, I needed to go through each one of the characters and do my own little translation which is always dangerous to do because my Chinese is almost non-existent. So I did this translation, and then I sent it off to Caddy, our expert in Chinese. And she sent me back an okay sign. So I'm able to share with you my version of this, which actually contains what I call a Chinese play on words or pun. Maybe not the right word to use pun, because pun has a sound of two words that would interchange the characters, but this is definitely a play on words. And when I was doing research on this, I discovered that in fact, 2 weeks ago, in mainland China, they passed a law forbidding people to pun. And so if you're in the news media and you publish a pun, you could be punished. This would not be good. So, in fact, in the non-Chinese media, the headline was, "China bans puns, citizens left disoriented." So if I gave this talk in Xi'an today, I would probably be imprisoned. So it's good to know. So I'm not sure what the technical term is for how these two characters interconnect with each other, but when you look at them, at the very top, verse 5, the first is the character Fei, and the second one, Shui. Is this right? Sure. Mm-hmm. So these characters look a lot alike, except the second one has an eyeball on top of it. So this comes into play in the verses, which I translate as, "The true cultivated person does not go too far in viewing the world." So you can try to figure some of this out yourself. I'm not going to interpret everything here. The second verse, "View the world in opposition." Fei, two hands, the etymology, two hands that are in opposition with each other, opposing, making a fight. The Chinese character bei, which means compassion, the two hands are fighting with each other, but they're joined together by the heart. So here, view the world as a place of opposition, and the self will unexpectedly stray negatively off the path. You're in trouble then. Don't focus on another person's eye faults. This is the way in which they look at the world, their perception. So here you have the term Fei, which turns into Shui. Don't focus on the other person's faults. I oppose my own eye fault, my own perceptions. That's what I want to clear up. Just separate yourself from having a heart in opposition. And here again we have the Fei term and the heart after that, not as part of the same character. But if you combine those two together, then you would have compassion. So you need to have compassion for yourself. Just separate yourself from having a heart in opposition. Use compassion, and your afflictions will break open and shatter. Gone a little longer than I had planned, but I hope that this will benefit us in our chanting. May all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings never be separated from the altruistic joy which is free from suffering. And may all beings dwell in the great equanimity which is free from attachment or aversion.